Thanks, Aaliyah, and welcome, everybody. As Aaliyah said, we're going to talk about rapid development of applications, search-based applications using Lucidworks Fusion. Before I get into that, just a quick reminder to those who weren't on last month's webinar. As the commercial sponsors of the Lucid and Solr projects, we at Lucidworks here put on annual conference every year around all things Lucid and Solr. It's called Lucid and Solr Revolution. It's October 13th to 15th in beautiful Austin, Texas. So if you can join us, it's a great time. A lot of interesting talks and good fun to be had around Solr. So with that, for those who are new to Lucidworks, just a little bit of background, and then we'll get into the meat of the talk today, which is going to be talking about how we can leverage Fusion with Solr to more quickly develop applications. Much of this talk is going to be driven by demo towards the end of this, so be sure to stay tuned for that. So with that, if you're not familiar with Lucidworks, at the end of the day, we're the heavy lifters behind Solr. We do a lot of work within the community, contributing code, making it more stable, making it more scalable, adding features and functionality all the time. You can see here on the right-hand side some of our customers, and like I said, we also sponsor Lucid and Solr Revolution, which, if you can make it, is a great place to dig in and really learn everything you want to know about Lucid and Solr. As a commercial company, obviously we need to keep the lights on. We offer 3 different products. On the left-hand side is probably the getting started product for somebody who wants to just have knowledge around Fusion and Solr. That's our developer support. We offer in the mid-tier Solr Enterprise, which gives you some of the features of what I'm going to talk about here in Fusion, as well as Solr support. And then the main focus of this webinar is Lucidworks Fusion, which you can see in a nutshell has a number of different features across a wide variety of topics. And of course, that's all backed by the great people who help build Solr as well. So you can rest assured that our support team knows and understands Solr and Fusion at very deep levels. So with that, I want to get in and kind of set the stage about why we built Fusion, and then we'll, like I said, we'll dig in and actually do some live demoing on it, show how you can pretty rapidly build out applications that do interesting things in a relatively short period of time. So when I think about kind of the foundations behind Fusion, there really are 3 core parts to it. The first one is this notion of what we call signals, and we've been beating this drum for a while. It's what we are all used to out on the web. Whenever you go to Google or Facebook or Amazon, you are constantly being leveraged as part of experiments, as part of signal capture, as part of feedback loops that help make that company's data smarter. Well, here at Lucidworks, we believe that you should have that capability as well in your applications, and not only that, it should be easy to deploy and it should be easy to leverage. And so we take this notion of signals, this notion of things like clicks and tweets and ratings and where a user is located, and we weave that into Solr and into Fusion in a number of different ways such that you can leverage signals for that indexing time, you can leverage them at query time, and of course you can leverage them in terms of what you actually display to your users as an end result. So that's pillar number 1, if you will, of the Fusion foundation. Number 2 really is, like I said at the beginning, we're the Solr people. Well, heck, let's go deploy more Solr. Solr is a first-rate NoSQL store. It's great at not only doing search, but it's also very good at doing a lot of things around data storage, distributed capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. So with Fusion, we want to take and build on that same great architecture and make it easy for you to, and your admins and your operations team to all know and understand what they're doing because they're deploying the same thing over and over again. And at the end of the day, in many ways, what we're striving for is how can we ask more interesting questions of Solr? Maybe they're questions that you yourself hadn't thought of yet, but because we've been doing this for so long, we know what those questions are, and so we can drive more interesting things out of Solr, such as powering analytics or powering recommendations or powering better conversions for your e-commerce site. At the end of the day, the really cool thing is if you have Solr already, you can simply point Fusion at it. If you don't have Solr, don't worry, we ship it with Fusion as well. So that's foundation or pillar number 2. Last but not least, we want to make sure we play very nicely in the big data ecosystem. So we have connectors and capabilities all around things like Hadoop and Apache Spark and Storm and all these other kinds of things, Hive, Pig, et cetera, such that you can leverage all of the big data tools that you have in place and add to it this nice complement of Fusion and of search, such as you can slice and dice your data in different ways, and you can make that data more accessible to more people within your organization. Because let's face it, at the end of the day, pretty much everybody on this planet knows how to search. Not everybody knows how to write SQL or knows how to write a pig script or any of those kinds of things. So we want to make that data more accessible, and we strongly believe that search is the best way to do that. So those are the three pillars, if you will, of Fusion. From that, we obviously have to build out a lot more capabilities in terms of really making this a production-ready production-ready system. And so to that end, we want to make it easy for you to rapidly design, build, and deploy search applications with Solr. So we've added in these things like pipelines, which I'll demonstrate here later. We've added in a bunch of user interface capabilities. We've integrated in very deeply security capabilities. And of course, what good are all these, what good is a data platform if you don't have means to get data in? So we've added in a bunch of connectors for doing data acquisition such that it's easier than ever to get data in and get to work. So what does all of this look like? We've put together a little architecture here, if you will, that kind of highlights what we think are the key parts of any search application. Obviously, on the left-hand side, you've got your data. Well, you need a way to get it in. So that's where this thing called the connector framework comes in. And that's really all about, like I said, flowing data into the core of this system here, which is Solr. Then we build out, things like security and APIs and admin capabilities around it, such that at the end of the day, you can take and leverage build out your application such that it can leverage your users' information and can integrate that in with your data and give you valuable feedback such that you can drive things like recommendations and landing pages and a variety of other capabilities, such that last but not least, here on the right-hand side, it's really all about how do you make your business more effective through things like understanding what people care about in your system, why they're doing what they're doing, and then obviously fixing it if you can or if need be. So that's kind of a quick high-level view of Fusion. With that, segueing in a little bit more into getting close to the demo, we are releasing Lucidworks Fusion 1.3 literally next week. It will be available for download. I just wanted to hit on some of the highlights of that here for you. And also note that the demo you're seeing is an early view of that Fusion 1.3 platform. Some of the highlights out here, we've added a bunch of new connectors into the system. First and foremost, we now will have support for Salesforce.com. We've heard a lot of people who want to get their data out of Salesforce and be able to integrate it and mash it up with lots of other different information that they have in their internal systems. So we've made it possible now for you to connect to Salesforce, bring down, index all of that content, whether it's your accounts, your cases, case notes, activities, opportunities, leads, contacts, all of that stuff. And in fact, what we do is we take our own Salesforce data and we feed that into our Fusion system such that we can then cross-reference it with things like what's happening in social media and the like. We've also are adding support for Drupal, and last but not least, somewhat in many ways eating our own dog food here at Lucidworks, we've added support for searching GitHub repositories, not just the code bases within GitHub, but also things like what are the events that are happening, what commits are going on, so on and so forth. So those are really highlight the connector side of things. We try to release at least one or more new connectors every release, and I think this continues that tradition. A few other highlights, as you can see, we're starting to add more and more natural language processing capabilities into the system. So we've added two new pipeline stages for as content comes in, automatically detecting sentences within that content, and then from there driving towards tagging it with things like part of speech. On down the road, we'll also use that to do parse trees and more advanced NLP systems such that you can have a much richer interaction with your data than just simply doing bag of words style approaches. Last few bullet points really are all about more ease of use. With taking feedback from our customers, we want to make it easier for you to get data in, especially if you're pushing in content from JSON or CSV. So we've added a number of features around that just working out of the box, and then, of course, you being able to take and tweak that data. And then last but not least, if you remember my first pillar or my first foundational part of Fusion, we want to make sure all of this signal processing stuff is as accessible as possible. So we made a number of steps there to make that even easier to use. And of course, as a company, we continue to invest in this such that we are now starting to see the ability to really very quickly showcase how these signals work and deploy them in real applications and see benefits within minutes as you go and do this stuff. So those are the highlights of 1.3, and that's all well and good, but what I really want to do is focus in on a demonstration of these capabilities. And so what I've done is I've gone and downloaded Fusion, I've unpacked it, I've switched into that directory, and I've fired up Fusion. Those first, 5 bullet points really showcase how easy it is to get started with Fusion. And then I said to myself, well, what's an interesting application that I can do? And one of the things I often want to do is look at what's happening in social media. I don't want to pay a bunch of money for third-party monitoring, so why not go out and build my own? So in this particular case, I'm actually going to do a live demo with real live tweets coming in. I know that's really scary. My marketing guy has already said, you sure you want to do that? And I said yes, and I'm going to show you why, because what we're going to do is actually index that content, and anytime we see URLs within it, we're going to go and fetch those URLs using a little bit of custom pipeline capability. And then we are also going to filter that content for not safe for work words, or at least we're going to attempt to do that. Obviously, Twitter is like the wild, wild west, and who knows what people are going to say in there. But I think I can showcase how you can do some of these things with very quickly in a pipeline, and such that we can all look and feel that this data is something we can share in a work environment. So with that, I am going to switch gears to my browser, and hopefully you all can see this here. So let me just check to make sure I've got the proper sharing in place. So obviously I can't get feedback, so I'm going to assume that Aaliyah is going to shout at me if she can't see this. What you see here is Lucidworks Fusion. This is obviously the login screen here. What I'm going to do is come on in and log in as an administrator. And if I can type properly, you are then brought into the landing page here around Lucidworks Fusion. What we try to strive here for a very familiar look and feel. Should feel a lot like what your phone does these days. Applications that make your life easier. So I'm going to come on into the admin, and I want to set up a collection that's going to store all of these tweets. In my particular case, this is obviously a pre-planned demo. I'm going to call that social URLs. And with that, what's happening is in the background, I went and created a collection in Solr using Solr's APIs. So this is something you'd have to use command line tools or something like that in Solr, or programmatically do it. It's as easy as clicking the button in Solr. And now I need to bring data into the system. So I mentioned earlier I want to index tweets. Well, we just happen to ship with a Twitter listener in our collection. So I'm going to come into my data sources tab here, and I'm going to click the data sources, and I'm going to go down to the social one, and you can see I've got several different choices here. I'm going to choose the Twitter stream because, hey, let's live on the edge and just take in whatever Twitter is sending our way, okay? We can also go and do things like filter it and create different followers and tracks and all of that kind of stuff. So because it's a live demo and it does ask for security credentials, what I'm going to do here instead is actually switch over to a separate tab called Postman, which is just something you can use to post to APIs, where I've put together a pre-canned set of constructors for this. So you can see very quickly, let me just make this a little bit larger. What I'm doing is I'm hitting the data sources API, and I'm going to create a data source called Twitter URLs. And on down here, I've got a bunch of things like field mappings and my credentials and all that kind of stuff, which I'm not going to share here with you. But most importantly, I'm associating this with that same data source that I just created. I'm going to go hit send, and voila, I get back the response showing me that that was created. And sure enough, if I come back in to my data sources, there is the data source that I just created. Now, like I said, you could go and create that as well just using the user interface, but it's a little bit faster and safer for me to just put that in using the API tools as well. So from that, that's all quite interesting. What I want to then do is go and show a little bit around these pipelines. So I'm going to come over here and click the Pipelines tab. And you can see that we ship with two different kinds of pipelines. Index side pipeline, which as you can imagine is all about content flowing into Solr, and then also query pipelines, which are all about modifying or working with requests like doing searches and things like that. As you can see here on the index pipelines, there's actually a number of different pre-canned pipelines that ship out of the box to make your life easier. One of the things that we do is provide defaults for any time you create a collection. That happens to be the social URLs default. So the naming convention there is obviously collection name and then default. In this particular case, I've got one stage set up that's all about data flowing in. Anytime data comes into this pipeline, it's going to hit this Solr indexing stage, which, as the name sounds, is going to send it on to Solr. As you can see from the drop-downs, we ship with a number of different pre-built stages out of the box here. And in fact, I'll show you some of those here in a minute. But most importantly, too, is you can also very quickly create your own using either JavaScript, or we do publish a Java-based SDK if you want to integrate your own. So it's highlighting some things here. Common for people when pre-processing their data to, for instance, apply regular expressions or named entity extractors or other stages to their data before it hits Solr. This pipeline makes all of that easier, okay? So what I'm going to do now is actually switch back again to Postman, and I am going to, I've got a pre-canned definition that's going to update all of these pipelines. So I'm going to run this very quickly in the background. You can see all of that went through. And then we're going to come back over here to the pipeline view, and I'm going to reload that. And voila, you see I now have 6 stages in my pipeline. The first one being a logger that says, hey, I want to output some additional information. It's great for debugging. If I want to turn that off once I'm ready for production, I can simply hit the skip this stage button, and on I go. And the meat of what I said I wanted to do was write a little bit of code that anytime I see a URL coming in on a tweet, I want to then go and fetch that data. And so with a little bit of work, I think it took me about a half hour to write this little bit of JavaScript here. A little bit of Googling showed me the proper way to do this. What I'm doing here is I'm taking in, I happen to know in the Twitter data as it's coming in, that Twitter automatically extracts links out of the core text and provides a separate field for that. We, of course, capture that field. So this first line says, go into the document and get that URL. And then I've got a bunch of code here that says, hey, go download that code. And then I'm adding it back into the document. So we publish documentation on how to write JavaScript stages and what things are in the context. In summary, this little JavaScript says, hey, go see if there's any URLs on the document already. If there are, go and fetch that content using, Java IO, and then add it onto a field on the document called raw HTML. And so that's this first stage here around getting the content. And then what I do is I go through it, and I'm actually going to use our Tika parsing stage to say, okay, let's look at that raw content and go extract valuable information out of it. So in this particular case, what Tika does is says, this is HTML. Let me go apply my HTML extraction, and out of that, all of this nice information flows. And then what I do is I've just got some cleanup stages down here that map some of the data and ultimately indexes to Solr. One of the cool things that we do with Fusion is actually allow you to preview this. So I'm just going to create a little dummy document here that shows you how to do this. So if you remember, we have in the real Twitter data, we have a field called URL expanded _string, and in it we can put in a value. I'm going to put in my own website just because that's a nice, clean, safe thing to do. I'm going to hit preview, view results. You can see in the lower right-hand corner, it's thinking, and now it shows me what happened to that data at every stage. So you can see it hit the JavaScript stage. That went and fetched the data. It then went and applied Tika to it. So you can see all we had coming in here was the URL. Now all of a sudden I've got things like title, content, parsing time, all of this information from Tika, and then on down the chain I can look at and see what's happening and essentially preview my ETL process before I'm actually ready to put this in production. Okay? So that's all well and good. Let's actually go back now and get some real data in here. So I'm going to come back to my collection of social URLs, and let's fire this thing up, and hopefully I did what I need to do in order to make that work. So I've kicked off those Twitter feeds. You can see it's starting. We start to give information. Already right away, we already have documents flowing into the system. And so we can go and search those. And so if we switch back here to, I've just got another window open where I'm going to open up our built-in search browser. And I come in here, it asks me to pick a collection. And so I'm going to pick social URLs. And you can see I've got some results here. Wow, those are a lot of numbers, not all that interesting. Things like, if you're familiar with Twitter, are the Twitter IDs. So probably not a great way of getting started, but rest assured we can make this easy by configuring the search UI. I can come in here, I can show you, I can set up defaults such that as a user, I can see content the way I want to see it. The way you do that is you can come in, and under the Documents tab, there's a bunch of different options for display purposes. So the first one here, the primary field, that equates to the title here, and then the secondary is this one below, and then the more fields maps to that last one. So for instance, if I want tweets to show up at the top, what I need to do is look for that here in the list. And I'm pretty sure it's in here somewhere. Or perhaps I missed it already. Where did it go? Nothing like live demos, and I'm not seeing it right at the moment. Let me just come back to that here 1 second. Make sure it's in there. Documents, primary, tweet. See, got bad eyes. Let me just drag that up to the top. If I can actually get a hold of it. There we go. And voila, I've got my search results there. And I can slice and dice this data in a number of different ways. So that's just using kind of the out-of-the-box configuration there. I'm going to hit save. And now those results are persisted in the Zookeeper such that anytime I want, I can come back in and I'll see these results laid out in the same way for this collection. So that's a great way to get started. Now I've got a little bit more insight into what's going on. You can see I can look at the actual fields on the content and so on and so forth. Where it starts to get even more interesting, as you remember I mentioned query pipelines before. Let's actually take a look at those and see how that affects the questions that we can ask of the system. So I'm going to come back to pipelines. I'm going to look at my query pipelines, and then I'm going to take the social URLs default here. And you can see I've got 3 things that come right out of the box here. I've got search fields, facets, and query Solr. So at the end of the day, what happens is the request comes in, it goes through each of those stages, and then ultimately goes out to Solr. As I did with the index pipelines, I've got a query pipeline here set up hitting the API within the system automatically, or hitting the API and updating those stages. So I'm going to hit that button as well. In the background, it just went and did an update on that, and now I can see those results. And I'm actually going to spend a little bit of time filling these in because why not? So let's come into the search field. Let's say I want to search specific fields only. I can do that by hitting the add button here. Let's see, I want to search title. You can see I can boost on title if I want. I can add in description because I happen to know anytime I download content, there's a description field. If I'm not sure what my fields are, I can actually see that in the collection view of the world where you can create and add and delete fields as well. And then last but not least, let's make sure we search the actual tweets as well. And then on the facet side, well, here, let me save that. That's now instantly being updated. As soon as I go back to that, I would have that reflected in my query. Let's come back, though, and actually add some facets as well. In this particular case, I want a facet on author, and I only want to facet if I have at least one of them. I am then going to facet on a flag in on tweets as to whether this is a retweet. In this particular case, because I'm using Solr's dynamic conventions, it shows up as is retweet Boolean, but you could obviously map this out to your own if you wanted as well. I'm going to go and save those. You can see in the upper right, system instantly notifies you that work's being done. Last but not least, I'm going to set up for a little bit later here with a recommendation stage. If you remember, I said earlier we ship with recommendation engine out of the box. I'm going to turn that on here as well. These defaults look good to me. Basically what we do here is we're going to use and leverage some signals later on to then boost our query results such that documents that are more popular based on user clicks show up at the top. So let me save that and then come in here, and if I can grab this correctly, I'm just going to drag this stage up because I want to make sure that I do the recommendation lookup before I do my main Solr lookup. So hopefully that makes sense. Just to capture everything again, I now have 5 stages on the query pipeline side. I added some search fields for default searches that I want to come in. I added some faceting. Oh, by the way, I have this filtering for not safe for work. I'm not going to show you all the details on here, but needless to say is what I did is I went in and am creating a Solr filter query that says, do not return any documents that have any of George Carlin's or the FCC's 7 bad words or whatever the number is these days. All right, so I'm automatically applying a filter to all my content to avoid any of those bad words in the data. Notice I'm doing this at query time and not at index time. We certainly could do this at index time as well. And in fact, if you, for instance, detected profanity in the content at index time, you could set up a stage that said drop that document altogether, or you could set up something like one of our regular expression stages that said, hey, remove that offensive word from the document and just put in XXXX or some other form of redaction. Naturally, you could apply that to other words as well. So we've got that stage live now. Let's come back into the Fusion system. I'm going to do that same query here again, and voila, you now see that I've got things like those facets on the left-hand side. And if I want, I can actually come back in and modify how those things look in terms of the actual display, such that instead of saying is retweet, I just wanted to say retweeted. And there we go. Now we've got the look and feel that I want, such that any time I come back in, the system is now ready to go. So that's kind of out of the box, getting a search experience going. This is great for if you want to just departmental level search, or you just want kind of your own quick and dirty local social media monitoring going on. You certainly can have this up and running very, very quickly, and I'm sure we'll share the code afterwards via GitHub or some other mechanism. So if you remember now, again, that foundational aspect that I said around Solr, one of the things we want to do is capture feedback from the way users are interacting with data. And to do that, what I'm going to do is set up a little bit of capabilities around our signal processing framework. Out of the box, whenever you create a collection, we by default make it possible for you to collect signals, but it's up to you to then hit our signal endpoint and say, hey, I've got a signal. And I'll show you that here in our search UI, but I've also got to do a little bit of setup such that whenever signals come in, we need to do some work to actually aggregate that information such that we can make it useful. These are called signal aggregations, and I'm going to set this up again programmatically using our REST APIs. So the first thing I have to do here is create an aggregation. And really what an aggregation does is say, go look at these signals, which, oh, by the way, are just Solr documents just like any other content. They just happen to be stored in a different collection. Go look at these, this Solr content and look at specific fields. In this particular case, I'm looking for 3 fields in every document. One's called the document ID, one's called the query, and one's called the filter. And so what we've done in our UI and what you can do in your application is say, hey, anytime a user clicked on this document for this query and had these filters applied, register that as a signal. As an example, this is a particular use case of signals. It is not the only use case. You can certainly set up other kinds of signals, and you can aggregate them as you see fit. And in fact, we provide a lot of math capabilities there such that you can build very complex models. This particular case, we ship with what we call a named aggregation. In this particular case, it's called the click aggregation or the click aggregator. And what this thing is doing is saying, go look at all of the clicks that are in our Solr index and run the click aggregation process on it. And you can limit that to some time range such that over time we can just only look at the signals that have changed from the last time. So hopefully that makes sense. If you refer to our documentation, we can give you a lot more details on this. And of course, we're always happy to demonstrate this for people again if need be. So I'm going to send in this click aggregation. You can see it came back with a 204 response saying everything's happy. So that means that now I've created the instance of the aggregation, and now I want to run that aggregation. And so I'm just going to send in and create a signals job, and you can see off it's going and running. And then last but not least, Solr, our Fusion has built into it a distributed fault-tolerant scheduling capability. You can use this to schedule internal services within Fusion, as well as any endpoints that you want to hit, you can go and do that. And I'll show you this in the UI here, but I'm going to set it up real quickly for you. In this particular case, I've got some JSON here that names this aggregation, and the core part of this says, go and run this service using a post call and do it every minute. So what I'm saying here now is that every minute I want to run this aggregation job that I just set up. And that's all going to happen in the background. You don't have to think about it. It just goes off and does what it needs to do. To see this back in our user interface in the admin, we have the scheduler here. I could have done it this way as well. Come in here, you can see there's my clicks aggregator. You can see all of the various options I have here around services. If I just want to hit an HTTP endpoint, or I want to hit Solr, or I want to talk to one of the Fusion services, I can do all of that. I can set it up to run once. I can say when I want it to start, when I want it to end, what interval, all of those good things. So that thing's all now, what we have all of this now running in the background. Essentially, we have this background process that's sitting there waiting for signals to happen. So the real question then becomes, well, how do we make these signals happen? And what we've done is actually bake this into our search user interface as well. This is new in 1.3, so if you've looked at previous versions of Fusion, this was not in there. I can come in and actually in my configuration, I'm going to come back in here to Documents, and underneath here, we've got a Signals option, and you've got two capabilities here. One that says I want to show this thing we call a signal generator, and the other thing saying, yes, I want to send feedback information anytime a user clicks on a document. So I'm just going to actually check both of these, and I'm going to hit Save. And then we can come in and start to play around with signals. On the first hand, the send click information, that simply happens anytime somebody does that. And you can see in the notification, in fact, it said click signal sent. And we, as users interact with your data, we would be capturing all of this signal information. Now, of course, this is a live demo, so we got to speed things up. So one of the things that we've done is allowed you to simulate what happens when a bunch of clicks happen. So I'm actually going to do a search here for, let's see, the word goal. I happen to, it's not a very good one. Again, this is live data, so let's see what else we got in here. It turns out I think a lot of people wish each other happy birthday on it. So let's look at that particular one. Not all that interesting. Again, live data on a demo. Let's go back to this one. We can actually just associate these signals with any query that happens, and in fact, we can associate it with the match all documents query in Solr as well. So let's just show how these work in reality. I can come down to the Simulate Clicks button, and let's say that while I'm giving this demo, somebody came in, or let's say, I don't know, 15,023 people came in and tweeted or clicked on this particular one, and let's say, I don't know, 2001 came in and clicked on http://twitter.com and clicked that one. What I then did is actually send into Solr these signal events, and I can show you that here, in fact, that we do have Solr running underneath the hood. I'm going to come in and I'm going to select my Solr signals index, and I can look at the actual queries here. And if I pick the right collection, we can see what they look like. So you can see here actually now, these are again just Solr documents. If you're used to the Solr APIs and if you're used to the Solr admin, this will all look very familiar to you. Obviously, this is not your typical content from the web or Twitter or any of that kind of stuff. This is our signals content as an example. And so what's now happening is in the background, remember that aggregation job that we had running, that is now doing its job. And the way I can see that is actually that's a separate collection. I can come in here and we ought to be able to see these aggregates now. And again, we store the raw signals in Solr, and then we store the aggregate information in Solr, such that at query time, it's simply the process of looking up in Solr and then merging that with our core content. So if I come back in here and do my search again, you can now see, if you remember correctly, and you can check the tape just to make sure I'm not lying, that those two items that I gave a bunch of clicks to have now risen to the top. And really the reason why that's happening, again, goes back to that query pipeline that we set up right here that has recommendation boosting on, such that what's happening, again, just to bring that home, that request is coming in for a search. It searches across the different fields. It adds the facets. It applies the filter query for not safe for work. And then it says, hey, go to the signals index and tell me for this query, what are people clicking on? Bring that back and now merge that with my keywords that I searched on, and then go query Solr. And the result of that is what you see here. Now, obviously, I canned those clicks. I didn't can those results. I just saw those for the first time here. In reality, obviously, in your application, these clicks would be spread out across your results. The beauty of what we've done here is we've built in a model such that it accounts for time, it accounts for popularity, such that things that are popular today aren't necessarily popular tomorrow or next week or next year. All of that decay function stuff is built into that named aggregation that I showed you earlier. Even better than that is if you don't particularly like our math, you can change it. We provide, again, that full mathematical capabilities underneath the hood such that you can plug in your own signal processing models. The nice thing here, though, is that you don't have to go build all the rest of the infrastructure to do that. You can just leverage Fusion and just focus in on how do you get the most out of your signals, not how to build out all of that processing pipeline. So all of that's well and good. That's kind of the main part of the tour here. I'm actually going to finish up with a few other things, hit on some of the dashboards. We've integrated in Kibana with all of this stuff, and in fact, we ship with a number of different dashboards out of the box. So right off the bat, you have log analytics available to you. So again, in that whole dog food theme, all of the logs that we are producing within Fusion are coming back into Solr as well. You do not have to set this up separately. You just deploy more Solr, and now you've got search across all of your logs. You've got search across all of the system metrics that are happening within your system around things like garbage collection and permgen usage and on and on. And in fact, you can customize this as you see fit because it's the way these dashboards work. Last but not least, what I can show you is how I very quickly built out a dashboard for looking at the Twitter data. I've stored that on my local drive called tweets.json. And while that loads up, I'm just going to grab a quick drink of water. What it's doing in this particular case, I've set up just a number of different panels to facet on things like author, on when the tweets are happening, what languages are being used, what countries are they in. You can see I can also do regular search results here, and I can come in and do searches here as well, just like we showed. And I can see that, Mary in 92768 said something with the word birthday in it, so on and so forth. And this is, again, all integrated in, so I can save this right back into Solr as well. So again, that theme of just making all of this stuff flow right out of Solr because it's a first-rate data store makes all of this easy. So that's a quick tour of signals, of pipelines, of dashboards. Last but not least, I promised you a tour of the security capabilities in the webinar announcement. So what I'm going to do here is actually come back into the admin. I'm going to hit our access panel, which is all about what people can do with the system. We support authentication, authorization, and encryption of all the communications within the system. And so to show that, what I'm going to do is set up a new role. In this particular case, what I want to do is set up such that this person coming in can only search the logs for the collection that I have in mind. And so in this particular one, let's just call that the logging role. So I'm going to hit add here. And what you do is there's a little bit of art to this, but in terms of setting up my permissions, I've actually just got over on my side screen here the capabilities that I want to secure. I'll walk through this real quickly. What I'm doing here is setting up a role that says, I want this, anybody who has this role, they can see all of the collections in my system. They can look at things like the pipelines. They can do searches. They can access Solr, so on and so forth. But they can't do a bunch of other things like perhaps some of the roles that we ship out of the box, like the admin who can do everything or the UI user who can only see certain parts. So this what this capability allows you can do. It's a little bit cryptic, but the really powerful thing here is that you can control access all the way down to the REST API verb level. And that's really important when you're building out applications around secure content. You might want to give somebody get access to content, but not put or post access to the content. In other words, you want to allow people to read the content, but you don't want them to write the content. And so let me, in the interest of time, go and save this. I'm then going to come in here and create a new user. Let's call him Bob. I'm going to set up his password. Make sure I type it correctly. And then I'm going to give him the login permission that I just created. And now I'm going to log out. I'm going to come back in as Bob. And I am going to go to my search application. And you can see here I can still see the collections. That's what I allowed. But then I restricted it down such that they can only search against these social URL logs. And it looks like I hit a little bit of a bug there because it is not returning in this particular one. Let me just double check real quick. Otherwise, in the interest of time, we will move on. Going back to the roles, just let me look in on the logging. This is where live demos are always fun. All right, I'm not seeing it right offhand, but what we can do is follow up on this. I believe what it should be doing, obviously, is restricting it down such that you can only see those results. So obviously I messed up something on my end in terms of keeping this up to date, and I don't know right off what that is. So with that, that's going to conclude it. Unfortunately, like I said, I can't demonstrate that, but happy to follow up on that. You can see the capabilities in there. I just messed up on the particular entry of that content, so that is my fault there. With that, that concludes the part of the demo that I wanted to show. So I'm just going to switch back and show the last couple of slides, and then we can be ready for questions. So if you want to download Fusion and try it out yourself, there's the link for it. Here's how you contact Lucidworks. If you want to reach out to me, grant@lucidworks.com or Twitter as well. With that, happy to open up the floor. It looks like we've probably got about 9 or 10 minutes for questions, so I will hand it back over to Aaliyah to start asking away.
Thank you. So we will now begin the Q&A portion of the session. Like I mentioned earlier, if we do not get to your question today, someone from the Lucidworks team will contact you directly. So we'll start with the first question. Will Fusion support other scripting languages besides JavaScript?
Great question. Right now we are supporting JavaScript. We have under development support for Ruby using JRuby. I believe that will be in our next version. I'll have to double check on that, but I believe that we'll be shipping with JRuby soon, and we are also looking at Groovy and Python so that you can really use your choice of scripting languages there.
What other social media sources will Fusion be able to crawl in the future?
So right now out of the box we have support for Twitter, both searching and streams. We also have Jive in there. And let me just double check. I think we have one other. So I'm not remembering. Let's just actually go look at the collections and the data source and add data source. Oh, and Slack. So anybody using Slack, we're big Slack fans here at Lucidworks. So we, in fact, ingest all of our Slack archives into our own Fusion as well. We have under development Facebook. We've taken also a look at things like YouTube and SlideShare and various other social resources as well. On the connector front, we tend to be very customer driven from the connector standpoint. So If you are looking for a particular connector and we don't have it, we're usually pretty quick to turn those around in terms of adding them into the system.
Are you integrating with Drupal 8? When will that be available?
To be honest, here's the Drupal connector. I do not know offhand what version it is. I believe what we typically do with connectors is take the latest officially released version. I am personally not familiar with Drupal at a deep enough level to say what that is, but it sounds like if 8's the newest one coming and it's not released yet, that'd be something that we would look at in the near future.
Is Zookeeper still the way to scale Solr with the Fusion platform?
It is indeed. And so as I mentioned earlier, we wanted to leverage the Solr foundation as much as possible. So in fact, all of the Fusion services, and there's actually a number of them running in the background, which I didn't get into here, are leveraging Zookeeper as well for coordination. So all of the Fusion services, like for instance, the things that power the pipelines, the recommendations, the connectors, all of those are distributed fault-tolerant services that are load balanced and cared for by Zookeeper, such that, again, you can leverage that same best-in-breed distributed coordination capabilities that Solr does. And this really brings a lot to the table in terms of, like I said, fault tolerance and things like load balancing and all of that.
If we have a current Solr index configuration, what is the effort to move to Fusion?
So if you have Solr already up and running, we can come in here to the system. We have Solr clusters. You can hit new Solr cluster. You provide us the connect string as well as perhaps how you want to manage the Zookeeper side if it happens to be a Solr Cloud version. Hit save cluster and it's up and running. And then it can be managed within the system. At collection time, if you already have Solr collections in place, you can come in here and you would select your cluster. You can provide details about how you want it laid out, et cetera. So if you already have an existing collection and you want it to be managed by Solr, we can do this import function here as well to bring those in under Fusion management. So in other words, sorry, I was going to say in other words, it's pretty quick.
Great. Next question. Can Fusion integrate with existing security frameworks such as LDAP or Active Directory?
It can indeed. What we do out on the login here, we actually have this notion of realms, which is a security concept around, isolating these different systems. We ship with support for LDAP and Active Directory. We are adding others as well. We've had requests for things like OAuth and SiteMinder and Kerberos and that. You will be seeing in the next version of Fusion, Fusion 1.4, a lot more around pluggable security capabilities. So that being said, there's already a lot in there in terms of LDAP and Active Directory, but we're going to continue to expand the set of security capabilities.
Is security capable of document-level entitlement support?
It is. That's a great question. What they mean by that is they want, when a user comes in and searches, to be able to restrict it down such that that user can only see documents for their eyes. So this is different from doing things like authentication. It's actually a form of authorization, but obviously authorization of content. That's as simple as a pipeline stage. So we can come in here at query time, and if your connector has support for access control list, you can come in and add a stage for that called security trimming. And what it does is the security trimming stage at query time works with the connector that indexed that particular document, and it gets back the access controls for it and then appends that to the query automatically such that all content that is authorized for that user is returned that also matches the query, and anything that is not authorized is filtered out in Solr. So it's essentially an early binding approach to security. We are also actively working on some more capabilities around this, so it's not just tied to your connector. At the end of the day, you can always do like what I did here with this filter, which is apply a filter query as part of a stage that says, you know, based on this user, restrict down what content they can see. So for instance, if you have your own connector, or if you're pushing content in not using one of our connectors, you can still take advantage of the pipelines to provide security.
Is Fusion running on Solr 5?
So Solr 5, for those who aren't aware, it just shipped, I think, last week. This current version 1.3, obviously, you know, as a company, we're actually doing 2 releases right around the same time. We just, you know, did a lot of work around Solr 5, and then, like I said, next week we are shipping Fusion 1.3. 1.3 will not ship with Solr 5 out of the box. But as I understand it, we are still able to connect to it and work with it. I believe in our next version, we will have a lot more capabilities around Solr 5. So, yes.
Great. So this will be our last question. Again, if we did not get to your question, we will contact you directly. So the last question is, pipelines seem very similar to data import handler. Is there a section to create or edit a custom data import handler?
So that's a great question. So data import handler, for those who aren't aware, is a built-in Solr functionality for importing content from things like database. It's primarily configuration-driven via an XML configuration in Solr. And in fact, it is the underpinnings of our JDBC data source. So underneath the hood, you can upload a JDBC driver, and then you can set up all of your SQL just like you would in the data import handler. Underneath the hood, we pass this off to the data import handler and configure it and run it. There's a number of key differences, I think, between pipelines and the data import handler. One, data import handler, while not completely the case, but is mostly focused on JDBC, pipelines, in fact, are way more flexible. They work both with connectors or just as straight-up API endpoints. So you can send data straight into an API or into a pipeline. You do not need a connector to do that. Our pipelines are also all dynamic. You saw me updating them. You saw me making changes to them. With pipelines, you have a lot more flexibility, such that you can set up multiple versions of pipelines, try them out, see which one's most effective, and then, you know, publish and say, I want this one to be the live one. Whereas with data import handler, that's all, you know, low-level configuration in Solr, and you know, you may or may not have to reload cores and all of that kind of stuff. The pipelines sit in front of Solr. In our experience, that gives you a lot more flexibility. You can scale them separately from Solr. You can deploy them separately from Solr if you so choose, and that gives you a lot more capabilities and flexibility around how they do. And let's face it, actually it gives you more scalability, because what you're saying is, let Solr do what it's good at, and then let this document processing or request processing happen in front of it, such that you can, you know, deploy more of those if you want or need for your application while still getting all the benefits of Solr.
Great. So we are now out of time. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, and a reminder that everyone who registered for this webinar will receive a link to the recording shortly. Thanks again, and we hope you enjoyed the webinar.
Thank you, everyone.